Today, we're going to be talking about wildfire preparation and recovery. Very exciting webinar for you today with many great speakers and experts in this field. We're going to be sharing some great resources with you. And during the presentation, if you do have a question, please use the question and answer box to ask the question, type out your question, and we will be able to get to that at the end of the presentation during our question and answer session. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Carly to introduce our speakers.
Hello, thank you, Sam. My name is Carly Quisenberry, and I am the Recovery Natural Resources Specialist for the State of Colorado's Office of Emergency Management. Thank you all for participating in the webinar today. We have a wonderful group of local speakers sharing their expertise on wildfire preparation and recovery. We hope you find some valuable information to guide you through your recovery process. To start, I'd like to acknowledge that there were many devastating fires across Colorado in 2020, and our hearts go out to those that suffered losses. Today, we will be discussing specifics on the Cameron Peak and East Troublesome, since they were the fires that were declared under the FEMA Major Disaster Declaration. That being said, the majority of the information provided today is relevant to all communities across Colorado. I'd also like to highlight the upcoming April 26th deadline to apply for the Small Business Administration Loan Program. If you are a primary homeowner, renter, nonprofit, or business within Grand, Larimer, Boulder, Gilpin, Clear Creek, Jackson, Root, Summit, or Eagle counties, and you sustained physical damages, please look into participating in this important federal program. Now I'd like to introduce our topics and speakers for the webinar. Covering phases of recovery and Forest Service lands, we have Reagan Cloudman, the U.S. Forest Service Public Affairs Specialist with the Arapahoe and Roosevelt National Forest and Pawnee National Grasslands. Speaking to insurance today, we have Carol Walker, the Executive Director of the Rocky Mountain Insurance Association. Covering rebuilding and permitting, we have Eric Fried, the Chief Building Official and Damage Assessment Coordinator for Larimer County. Talking about revegetation, we have Jean Backhouse, the State Resource Conservationist for the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Covering flood after fire and preparing for disaster, we have Doug Mahan, the National Flood Insurance Program Community Assistance Coordinator with the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Speaking to large animal evacuations, we have Reagan Adams, the Veterinary Specialist at CSU Extension. Talking about investment in wildfire mitigation, we have Jim Webster, the Program Coordinator for Wildfire Partners. Speaking on ongoing recovery and grants, we have Patricia Gavelda, the Mitigation Section Planning Team Supervisor for the State of Colorado's Office of Emergency Management. And then our last topic today will be covering other FEMA initiatives covered by Vince Meldrum, the President and CEO of EarthForce. I hope you enjoy the webinar, and now I will turn it over to Reagan Cloudman. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So as she said, I am a public affairs specialist with the Arapahoe and Roosevelt National Forest and Pawnee National Grassland. And 2020 was an impactful year for fires. Starting in August and going through December, we had over 100 days of fires. And with the two largest being the Cameron Peak fire and the East Troublesome fire that we'll get into. Over that, it impacted not only National Forest System lands, but also Rocky Mountain National Park and many private and local lands as well. It was about 300,000 acres of just the Arapahoe and Roosevelt National Forest that we experienced burns on this year. And what we saw in these two largest wildfires in Colorado's history is that drought, along with very dry, very windy conditions, forced large growth of these fires. And even with Cameron Peak, even after we had a snowstorm, the fire grew exponentially. So not a typical year for us at all. We can go to the next slide. So the Cameron Peak fire started on August 13th and was called contained on December 2nd. It grew to be the largest fire in Colorado history at over 208,000 acres. We had over 450 structures lost, lost during that fire. We know it was human caused, but the details of the fire are still under investigation. And you'll see on here, it says that 36% of the fire was a high or moderate soil burn severity. And when we talk about recovery of the land, we often refer to that soil burn severity and how much vegetation, how much roots are left in the soil, how hot they burned, and whether they're going to be able to absorb moisture and have regrowth, or whether they were burned so severely that they won't necessarily recover as quickly. The one thing that we do know when it comes to recovery of these large fires is that it is going to take years, not months, for us to recover across the forest. So we can go to the next one. And the East Troublesome fire, I should mention that Cameron Peak, for those that aren't familiar, burned in Larimer County and was started in the upper reaches of the Poudre Canyon. The East Troublesome fire started on October 14th and was fully contained on November 30th. And this fire also believed to be human caused, but details are still under investigation. It grew to be the second largest fire in Colorado history at over 193,000 acres. And hundreds of structures also lost on this fire. The soil burn severity was similar with the Cameron Peak fire, with 53% of it being high and moderate. East Troublesome was a unique fire in that it started in Grand County, but it jumped the Continental Divide in Rocky Mountain National Park and then started to impact areas near Estes Park in Larimer County. So most of the information I'm going to share today really focuses on that Grand and Larimer County side of things. However, we also had fires burn in Boulder County as well. And then we can go to the next slide. So this is kind of the meat of what I'm going to talk about today, and that is the phases of recovery, so that people kind of get a sense of what's left out there for us to do on the land and what have we done so far. So the first step is fire suppression repairs, and those are, there are hundreds of miles of lines, fire line, whether it is hand line that was dug by a firefighter or dozer line made by heavy equipment. We have to go back and we have to repair that so that we don't have erosion issues, so that they don't open new roads in the forest where they shouldn't be. And so we were fortunate, we did get some work done before snow halted operations, but because these fires burned so late into the season, we still have a lot of fire suppression repair work out there. The Forest Service is taking care of that on National Forest System lands, and then counties are working on private lands. So you will see that work will continue this spring and summer. And the next step that we typically do is BAER, Burn Area Emergency Response. Not the fuzzy kind, but this is an analysis that specialists take, and this is how we come up with that burn severity map that I mentioned before. And this is hydrologists and soil scientists and recreation specialists, just a whole slew of specialists going out into the field, utilizing data that is collected from satellite imagery as well as being on the ground. And they come up with that burn severity map, and they look at immediate threats to public safety, as well as any National Forest System land infrastructure that's out there that could be damaged immediately following the fire. So those, I know at the end, there's going to be information shared with folks with links there. We have websites on NCWeb for all of the fires that we experienced, the 5 large fires this year. So folks can find those reports as well as those soil burn severity maps if they want to reference them. And then we share all of this information with our partners. But through BEAR, we identify work that needs to be done, whether that is going in and removing hazardous trees from areas where we invite people to stay, like at a trailhead, whether it is needing to remove culverts or doing any other kind of road work so that we don't have erosion or washout situations. And just really looking at that safety and that infrastructure on National Forest System lands. That work, a little bit was able to start in the last fall, but much more, and most of it will have to be done this spring, and a lot after the snow has melted, as well as specialists getting back out there in some of those areas that were covered with snow that they weren't able to see for themselves, to figure out if there's even more work that we need to do. And then finally is that long-term recovery and restoration. And throughout the process, we work with our partners, but really during this long-term recovery effort, we are working in Boulder, Grand, and Larimer County with recovery efforts in those locations. And that includes not just counties, but watershed organizations, water providers, and other nonprofits, other federal agencies, the state, to look at what that long-term recovery needs are, what they are, and how we can expedite and really work together to do the best work we can on the land. Just like fire doesn't know boundaries, recovery is the same way. We have to look across the landscape. And so, really, if you're in one of those counties, check, there's a lot of information out there about recovery efforts that are taking place. And with that, I will turn it back over.
Go ahead, Carol.
Oh, thank you. Am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Good afternoon. I am Carol Walker, Executive Director of the Rocky Mountain Insurance Association, and understanding how your insurance works, what it does and doesn't cover, and how to be financially prepared for the unthinkable is really critical to preparing for or recovering from a wildfire or any type of disaster. So often you'll see the devastation caused by fire. The photo on my slide is a rebuilt home from the Mountain Shadows neighborhood 1 year after the Waldo Canyon fire. That's what we on the insurance side hope to help you get back to. First, understand it is a process, even a legal process, but there are many resources to help you along the way. Foremost, your homeowner's insurance provides coverage to repair and rebuild the structure of your home. The limits and coverages are what you purchased. Under Colorado law, you're at least offered replacement coverage. That provides an inflation guard, usually of at least up to 20%, to help you rebuild and place all of your personal belongings at current replacement costs. Insurance also pays to replace your stuff. Hopefully you had important documentation or a home inventory of your personal belongings. Unfortunately, many people don't have that, but your adjuster will work with you to help recreate that. Under Colorado law, again, you have up to 1 year to submit an inventory, and you can actually collect 30% of the total amount up front. We encourage you, though, to complete that full inventory to get the full replacement cost of all of your stuff. Policies do have content limits, so it's essential to consider extra insurance or what we call scheduling big ticket items like antiques, artwork, jewelry. Again, having videos, photos, and documentation of your belongings ahead of time is one of the most important preparedness steps you can take. You also have a certain amount of money for out-of-pocket expenses. We call that ALE, or additional living expenses. That pays for you to live elsewhere while your home is uninhabitable. Insurers are required to provide up to 12 months and do offer up to 2 years, but it's going to depend on your purchasing decision. And so you're going to want to talk to your insurance professional about what your limits are. One of the other things you normally wouldn't think about, but someone who has a home devastated by a wildfire will be talking to their insurance professional about what kind of coverage do I have for debris removal, for landscaping around my home. Unfortunately, that won't pay for every tree you've lost, especially if you're in a mountain community, but it will provide some money for landscaping replacement and coverage for building code upgrades. We call that law and ordinance covered. Again, there are certain policy limits in place. We know it can be confusing, especially if you are a victim of this wildfire, but your insurance adjuster will work with you and a reputable contractor. That's key. We want to make sure that you're selecting someone reputable to be doing that repair and rebuild. They'll create what we call a scope of work. They'll have payments, they'll have timeframes, and then do understand you'll receive different checks. So the first check you get isn't the last check. One you'll get for actually the actual cash value, as we call it, for a settlement. When work is completed, you're likely to get another check. And then you'll get actually a separate payment for all of those personal belongings that you've done with your home inventory. And then another one for those additional living expenses while you're living elsewhere. You will still pay your mortgage. This is confusing for a lot of folks. You still are responsible for that, and your lender will be part of this process, and they'll be included on any settlement. Finally, make sure you're working, as I said, with a licensed, insured, reputable contractor. You'll also hear more about this during the presentation about flood insurance, but make sure you're talking to them about flood insurance. It's a separate coverage with flood after fire. You're now at higher risk. You'll want to at least consider purchasing a separate flood policy. So bottom line, your company and the industry have many resources. I know I'm just scratching the surface, but we certainly on our website, we have a flood after fire information. We have steps to walk you through the claim settlement process. And then on the preparedness side, now's the time to do an annual insurance checkup to be financially prepared for wildfire and severe weather season, hail season here in Colorado. With that, I'll turn it back over to you.
I think I'm next. This is Eric Freed. I'm the Chief Building Official for Larimer County. And unfortunately, we've been through a number of natural disasters. We're very competitive when it comes to wildfires, floods, and snows. So we have some experience at this. Presumably, those of you who were through the Cameron Peak Fire and East Troublesome have been back to your property already. But just in case you hadn't, or for other areas, remember that this is a hazardous area right now, even when the fire is out. So be careful when you return home. You probably want to wear a mask to avoid inhaling dust particles. If anything is still smoldering, anything that was in the house is burning, you may have toxic smoke you're inhaling. There may be damaged power lines. There might be leaking propane. There's debris everywhere. There's broken glass and metal, nails, screws. So wear boots, wear gloves, wear a mask. Be careful when you go back to the property. First thing you're going to have to do is deal with debris removal. What I would do is check with your solid waste department and your county or city health department. It may not be called solid waste, it might be called landfill. Find out what the requirements are for disposing of cleaning products, paint, batteries. Typically after a fire, state environmental law requires you to properly deal with potentially asbestos containing materials. Sometimes those rules are waived after a fire, as they were, at least for our landfill after this fire, but definitely check with the solid waste department on what the disposal requirements are for those things and for possible hazardous waste. So that's the first thing. Then when you get the debris removed, you may or may not want to rebuild. Let's assume you want to rebuild. You have the financial resources, emotionally you want to rebuild. Things look very different. Behind me is what part of the Cameron Peak Fire area looked like before the fire. That happened to be our property. Looks very different now. So if you decide you want to rebuild, check with your county or city permitting office, maybe the building department, maybe building and planning, community development. Find out what the rules are. You probably have to meet current building codes. That's what we were talking about. The last presenter was talking about with insurance law and ordinance. It may have been built before there was even a permit required, or your cabin or home may have been built without a permit. It might have been built under an older code. Typically new work is going to have to meet new codes, and that's going to be a lot harder to do. In the Cameron Peak Fire area, that whole area is a high wind area. There are no prescriptive rules in the building code. To build to that, you're going to have to hire an engineer to design your new structure. So check with your county or city building departments, if you're not in Larimer County especially. You want to check with your planning department, see if the rules have changed, whether maybe you had 2 homes on the property that was okay at the time, or that was before the rules changed. That's a non-conforming situation. Can you rebuild 2 homes? Check with them. Check about setbacks. Check with your floodplain folks. That might be the engineering department in our case. It might be stormwater management. Are you in a floodplain? Can you rebuild at all? Can you rebuild in the same place? So once you find out what those basic rules are and what the design criteria are, wind loads, snow loads, then you can hire an engineer. And if you want, you can hire an architect or a designer to rebuild the cabin or the home. Contractors were mentioned. In Larimer County, you can rebuild your own home if you're doing your own work. If you're hiring a contractor, they have to be county licensed. The advantage of that is to get a county license, they have to demonstrate experience, some knowledge and insurance requirements. So again, check with your local department to see, do contractors have to be licensed? What kind of license do they need? Do they have a list of licensed contractors? Is the contractor I'm thinking of hiring licensed? Be careful of people who just happen to be in the area. There's a lot of people who come in after a fire who may want to take advantage of you. They tell you they were working on your neighbor's property and they can give you a discount. That's probably a red flag. Make sure they're properly licensed, but that's not enough. Also ask for recent references. Check those references. Check with the Better Business Bureau. Make sure they know how to do the kind of work that you want to do. So those are some of the main things you want to look at. If you're in Larimer County, you can always check with us. We have a lot of resources on our site, larimer.org/building. That'll take you to the Cameron Peak Fire Rebuilding page. You can always contact us. I can put my contact information in the chat. You can come into our office or Zoom with us. We're here to help you rebuild. We have a program to do fast track for replacement primary structures. We have a program to give you some assistance with the permit fee if you're a fire survivor. Your local department may have that as well. And I can take any questions at the end. So thanks for listening. I'll turn it over to the next person.
Thank you, Eric. Next, we have Jean.
Thank you. When you're looking at trying to do the revegetation or potential revegetation after you get back in and get your house and everything else back up, we got to look at some other things, when we're trying to stop any of the erosion that may be potentially occurring. We need to look at that burn severity that was talked about already when you're trying to decide whether you need to reseed. If your property is under what they deemed as that high severity burn, you probably are going to have some type of vegetative assistance or seeding to take place to get that vegetation back. If you're in that moderate severity area, it's really going to depend upon what burned. Did you have a lot of pine needles that burned? Did you have trees that burned? Or was it just grass? Usually if it's just the grass, you're going to be okay. It'll probably come back fairly well. But if you're under the pine needles, because of the waxiness there, it tends to cause what's called a hydrophobic layer on your soil. And if you're in those low burn severity areas, don't worry about it. The grass will probably green up already this spring. So if you're in that high burn severity area, that hydrophobic soil really needs to be dealt with. So what can you do on those kinds of areas? You need to be looking at, trying to break up that crust that has been caused by that burn. You need to, try to do some type of activity out there, going out there with a rake in a small area, that will work. You may need to use an ATV for a large area, but if you have a 40-acre parcel that's all burned, you probably are going to be looking at, I need to remove some of the trees and stuff out there. And so that tree removal or deforestation, whatever, salvage logging is going to be something that really provides that disturbance to break up that hydrophobic layer. And so that you're going to be able to get in there, do the seeding that you're really looking at trying to do. So the low severity burn areas, like I said, is going to regrow quickly. But if you do decide to reseed, you're going to need to determine a couple of things before you get going. First of all is, what kind of soils do you have on your site? Do you have sandy soils, silty soils, clays, or in some locations in the mountains, you're getting into some granitic material, better known as grus. So different plants grow in different types of soil. So you need to know that kind of information before you can, choose what you're going to do. And then once you know your soil type, then you can start looking at the plant types. Do you want to put grass back in there? Do you want to put shrubs back in there? Do you want to put trees back in there? Shrubs and trees are going to be more expensive and slower growing. Grass is probably going to be the most economical thing to do right now. And again, there are species that don't grow in some areas. So really be cognizant of what you're choosing for species on that. Once you've gotten through a lot of this stuff, you can start looking at, okay, now I'm ready to go. I can do this work. And you just need to make sure that what you're doing is not going to cause a weed issue or take over some of the forest issues when you're choosing those plants. So you don't want to choose an invasive type grass for, in that mountainous area. You want to try and keep to those native grasses so you can do the things that really need to be done. The other thing that really goes on during a lot of these fires and stuff, with the NRCS, we actually have what's called the Emergency Watershed Protection Program. And through that program, we actually go in and try to stabilize areas through specific sponsors that we work with to do this. And in the Cameron Peak area, we actually have two sponsors that we're working with there, Larimer County and City of Greeley. And so those sponsors have actually decided to step forward to bringing monies to the table, and our CS is bringing monies to the table. And we actually have projects that are in the process of being planned for trying to stabilize that area, to stabilize it, not to revamp it, bring it back to what it was before, but to try and stabilize those areas. We're looking at, doing seeding projects, mulching, diversions for flood control, grade stabilization structures, water control structures, inlets, stream bank stabilization, a number of other projects and stuff like that. And so we're trying to work on those in the Cameron Peak area. We're also doing that kind of work in the East Troublesome area. So in East Troublesome area, the sponsor there is Northern Water and Grand County. So they actually have some projects that are being planned in those areas. So if you need to, talk to your community leaders there with the county and stuff, and they can provide you more guidance on what they actually have planned. Or as we get going on with the NRCS, we're going to have a number of staff members out in the field that can provide you some assistance. So there are a lot of things going on, and I'm just going to mention Calwood. That one is going to be managed by Boulder County, and we're working with them also. So the revegetation side of it, again, goes back to proper planning so that things get done in the proper method, and we can use the plants that are going to be most sustainable out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Gene. I'm Doug Mahan. I'm with the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and I am the National Flood Insurance Program Coordinator for the state. As Reagan and Gene mentioned, wildfires dramatically change the landscape and ground conditions, which can lead to a higher risk of flooding. Floods are often the last thing people think about after a wildfire. But these wildfires significantly increase the risk of flood, particularly in areas that are not historically prone to flooding. Natural unburned vegetation and soil normally act as a sponge when it rains. However, the heat from a fire can bake the ground, creating a surface that will not absorb water and can increase the speed with which water flows off the slope. These flooding events are generally more severe as it takes far less rain to produce a flood or a mud flow. It's also important to understand that these heightened risks of flood will remain until vegetation is restored and the watershed has stabilized, which can take up to 10 years. As Carol Walker mentioned, flood insurance may be something that you want to consider, whether or not you're in a regulatory floodplain. The damage and the burn scar can impact your property. So we are hosting a flood after fire specific webinar on April 20th. It's from 5:30 to 6:30, and I'll ask that you join us if you'd like more information about the flood risk. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right. So Colorado's no stranger to natural disasters. We have blizzards, tornadoes, floods, and fires. Coloradans live with a myriad of potential disasters, and preparation is the key to recovery. Understanding the specific hazards and how your property may be vulnerable, in this case, the fires, as mentioned by Reagan Cloudman in her presentation, we have the bear maps. And the slide that you see now to the right is a representation of a bear map showing the severity of the burn for the East Troublesome fire. So we want to be proactive in mitigating hazard risk and decreasing potential impact to your properties. So you want to thin wildfire fuel, remove debris, elevate, and flood-proof when feasible. You also want to be ready and make a plan. You want to have a family emergency communication plan. How do you contact your family and your friends? Where will you meet? Plan also for evacuation or shelter-in-place contingencies. You want to put together a to-go bag or a kit. This may include water, food, medications, cash, important documents, extra clothing, flashlight, batteries, and other things. You want to create one for each member of your family, ensure that they are readily accessible. In the case of evacuation, you want to grab these bags. Ensure that you keep sufficient fuel in your vehicles. Half a tank is always a good measure. You want to know your local community's emergency plan, including evacuation routes and the location of emergency services, hospitals, and shelters. Your community may be caught by surprise by a disaster, or evacuation routes may be inaccessible, in which case you may need to shelter in place. Preparing your home in advance for an extended stay without access to day-to-day essentials, utilities, and emergency services is vital. You also need to stay informed. Sign up for your local emergency alerts or reverse 911 telephone alerts. You also want to pay attention to the weather forecasts. With weather forecasts, understand that an emergency watch or advisory generally means conditions are possible for an event. An emergency warning means an event is likely. When you receive a warning message, you need to implement your plan and get out of harm's way. Your plan should also include insurance, as Carol Walker mentioned, so you are better able to recover quickly when the danger is past. And you'll want to practice these plans with your family and housemates so everyone knows their role when it comes time to act. More information will be available on disaster preparedness at the end of this presentation on a slide showing the resources available. Now I'll hand the presentation over to Reagan Adams from CSU.
Thank you, Doug, for that wonderful lead-in. You covered many of my topics. People with large animals, a large number of animals, feed yards, dairy, poultry barns, boarding facilities, they usually have a risk mitigation plan for natural disasters. What I'm going to do is talk to people with smaller groups of livestock. And I'd like to point you to that resource page that Doug mentioned, to the brochure Saving the Whole Family, made by the American Veterinary Medical Association, for details. What I'd like to emphasize is 5 basic issues. The first is handling. Remember that large animals, livestock, are prey animals, and so their survival depends on the fact that they are aware of dangers or threats, and they're likely to bolt. So your most important task during a disaster is to keep your cool, move calmly, and deliberately. The adage we have around animals is move slowly to get the task done quickly. The second issue is transportation. Have transportation for all of your animals to move out in one trip. Ideally, the threat or the worry of having to go back for a different load of animals will worry you and thus worry your animals. So evacuate early when it's still a volunteer evacuation. Make sure that your vehicles are all gassed up and aired up, as Doug mentioned, and ready to go. Make sure your animals load easily into the trailers and that they feel comfortable traveling. Remember, we want to keep them from bolting and being neurotic. The third thing is information. As Doug mentioned, have the weather alerts and the emergency alerts. Also, it's nice to have a NOAA radio for the weather alerts if your cell towers go down or your electricity runs out. Those are $30 items, which are a great investment. Under information, consider, are your animals identified by microchips, brands, tattoos, all sorts of things? And if they aren't identified, before in the preparation for the disaster, take paint and paint on their flank or their hooves your telephone number, because if you get separated, they're oftentimes hard to describe or to find. Third thing is under information is to have a list, both in hard copy and electronically, of your most important animal contacts, your DVM, your farrier, your brand inspector, your associated partners that would be able to help you, friends that might have a farm far away where you could shelter your animals. And finally, do you have your animal's medical history and medication with you when you evacuate? The fourth issue of importance is community building. This goes 365 days of the year. If for some reason you can't get home to take care of your animals, do you have a buddy system? People that know your place, they know your animals, and when they show up, your animals go, "Hey, Harry's here, I feel good," not "Who's this stranger trying to think they can feed me?" So please always have a buddy system. Do it for your friends, have your friends do it for you. And the second part about community building is find out from your emergency manager if your community has an animal disaster plan. If it does, become part of it. If it doesn't, help build one. And finally, supplies, food, water that the animals are used to, medications, handling equipment, first aid. Have a 3 to 5 day supply for both situations in which you're sheltering in place and when you're evacuating. In summary, 5 things to focus on: handling, transportation, information, community building, and supplies. Best of luck. I think I'm turning it over now to Jim Webster from Boulder County.
Thanks. I'd like to thank FEMA and the state for putting on this event. I'm going to switch gears here and talk about preparation and mitigation for everyone, not just those who are recovering from wildfire, but we're going to talk about preparation for future wildfires. So everyone who lives in high wildfire risk areas needs to prepare for wildfire. This preparation includes hardening of homes and structures and creating defensible space. So in the slide you see here, you see the home of Lester Carplus, who lives outside of Netherland in Boulder County. He spent a great deal of time preparing for wildfire, and his mitigation played a critical role in his home surviving the 2016 Cold Springs fire. He participates in Boulder County's wildfire mitigation program called Wildfire Partners, and we provided him with technical assistance, detailed customized report, an action plan to help him prepare his home, his property for future wildfires. So the plan helped him work smarter, not just harder, to perform mitigation. He removed vegetation around structures, but you can see he still has a number of trees around his structure. Some people think creating defensible space is clear cutting. That's not the case. He removed junipers around the homes, removed trees to create spacing, and that work helped prevent flames from igniting his home. So we're concerned in wildfire about embers. Embers can travel a great distance, and they're what destroy most homes during wildfire. So we want to harden structures, things like screening vents, to prevent those homes from igniting. So effective mitigation is not easy. It takes a lot of time and money and requires some technical assistance as well. I don't want to give the false impression and say mitigation is easy because it takes a lot of work. It's true, some tasks are simple. Cutting your grass is simple, which is one important mitigation task, but some of the tasks are challenging and can require technical expertise. So that's why I encourage homeowners to seek out technical assistance. It's difficult because we understand that different parts of the state, there's different organizations that provide technical assistance. It may be your county, like in Boulder County or Eagle County, the county provides that technical assistance to help you mitigate effectively. It may be your fire district, Elk Creek Fire Protection District helps provide that assistance. It may be a nonprofit organization or your HOA. The Colorado State Forest Service is a great organization that provides technical assistance. It may be a contractor, a consulting forester that can provide that assistance. So to prepare for wildfires, it's important to get that technical assistance to prepare your property. Also want to mention the importance of maintenance. Mitigation is not a one-time action. It's important to do ongoing maintenance as long as you live in the home to reduce that wildfire risk. It's also important to work with your neighbors in the community. You can see this picture on the slide with people coming together and doing community work around their neighborhood to reduce that wildfire risk. So there's a lot of action to take before fires to prepare for wildfires on the individual home level and with your community. In Boulder County, we're entering our 8th year of Wildfire Partners, where we work to provide this technical assistance and ongoing support. We have over 40 partner organizations, including insurance companies. If you're interested in finding out more, you can check out wildfirepartners.org. But we're here to help homeowners prepare for mitigation. Funding is also an issue. Some communities might be eligible to have some funding. And I'm going to turn it over now to Patricia, who'll talk a little bit about grant opportunities and some other issues. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My internet appears to hear me.
We can hear you, Patricia.
Thank you so much. If you could go back one slide, please. So we know that mitigation works. For $1 invested in mitigation, there's a return of $3 to $6. For approximately 2005 to present day, 2021, FEMA, the state, and locals have invested over $16 million in wildfire mitigation efforts such as defensible space, fuels reduction, and ignition-resistant construction. The photos that you're seeing, the before and after, are a great example of losses avoided. These are photos of Solitude Park, which helped with the Waldo Canyon suppression efforts. So in June 2012, the Waldo Canyon fire destroyed 347 homes that had an insured loss of approximately $500 million, $454 million. Mitigation efforts that were completed prior to the fire in this park that was adjacent to the Cedar Heights neighborhood helped to slow down the fire, and the neighborhood was saved. So this losses avoided project, it's estimated about $75 million was saved and allowed 250 families to safely return to their homes after the fire. Next slide, please. In response to the wildfires that occurred in northern Colorado last year, the United States Small Business Administration, the SBA, is offering low interest loans to all non-farm businesses of any size, private nonprofits, homeowners, renters in the Colorado impacted and contiguous counties of Grand, Boulder, Clear Creek, Eagle, Gilpin, Jackson, Larimer, Routt, and Summit counties. We'll have information specific to that on the resource page, but the SBA has established a virtual disaster loan outreach center. It's open from Monday through Fridays, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And one can contact an SBA customer service rep via email or phone, and also apply online. But as Carly stated at the beginning of the slideshow, Monday, April 26th is the deadline to apply for the SBA loans. On January 15th, 2021, the president set forth a major disaster declaration for Grand and Larimer counties for public assistance and hazard mitigation. Because of this disaster declaration, FEMA is able to provide grants through their public assistance program to the state and local governments. And these public assistance program grants help to restore public infrastructure such as roads, bridges, utility lines that were damaged or destroyed by the disaster. FEMA and the state also offer mitigation grants to local governments and private nonprofit entities for long-term projects such as wildfire fuels reduction, defensible space around homes that will reduce future losses. The projects are generally awarded a year or two after the event is declared. And estimates for the hazard mitigation grant program and the post-fire hazard mitigation grant program for these events are currently estimated at about $7 million for mitigation measures. Local long-term recovery programs are also ongoing in the communities that are affected or were affected by the wildfires. Contact your local emergency manager for additional information on these programs. This slide shows just a snapshot of some of the projects categories that were funded by FEMA and the state to 2021, the wildfire programs and projects, flood reduction projects, and some landslide and slope stabilization programs. So this is just a snapshot of some of the work that the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management in conjunction with FEMA and our local partners have funded to date. And I will turn it over to Vince, who's our next speaker.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vince Meldrum. I'm with Earth Force, and I'm here to talk to you about a little bit different kind of program, which is a partnership that my organization, Earth Force, has put together with FEMA and some local floodplain offices across the state. And that project is really designed to get young people involved in thinking about how their communities can be more resistant to natural disasters, particularly floods and fires. And how they can become involved in helping communities make that decision. I'm going to start by telling you a really quick story, which is a story of some middle school students in Estes Park, Colorado. A couple of years ago, they became concerned that their community was going to have challenges with fires in the future, and decided that they wanted to do some deep research and understand the fire preparedness issues for their community. They found when they did the research that far too many communities, far too many members of the community had allowed brush and fuel and other sources to grow too close to their homes. And they were really concerned about that. And so as Jim discussed and some others, that can be a real concern. And so the young people started to look for some solutions for that and landed upon a program called FireWise. And FireWise is a national program that looks at how do you engage, or how do you clean out and make sure that your community is safe when a fire does hit, or it can be as safe as possible. And those young people found that this program was great, but it wasn't really used very much in Estes Park. And so they've taken themselves on a 2-year journey. In the first year, they just wanted to communicate to community members the challenges that were faced if you allowed brush to grow too close to your building. They did a lot of local fairs and such, and did a lot of outreach to talk to people about what that might look like, how they might solve that problem, and how they could work on it. They even went out and volunteered at some community members' homes to cut down brush and move trees further away. The second year, those young people started to look at how they could work with insurance companies and others to try and solve this problem. And so they've developed a whole community of adults who are helping them increase the awareness in their community about FireWise, increase the awareness about wildfire preparation, and increase just the general community awareness about natural disasters. These young people are all part of a program that we call the Rise Challenge. And the Rise Challenge is a kind of a mixture of things. In part, it's a classroom program. Kids study fires and natural disasters, try to understand them and understand the issues that are happening in their community. They then take that and identify solutions and try to get the community to adopt those solutions. It is part community engagement. These young people go out into their community and they talk to all kinds of stakeholders and people that live there and identify ways to solve it. And it's part of competition. Each year, kids write proposals for how they would deal with natural disaster preparedness and mitigation issues in their community. And then we judge those. And the top proposals win cash prizes, as well as all the students that participate win money to help them implement their program in their classroom. There are a couple of reasons that we do this program. First and foremost is that we really want to build citizen participation in our communities in Colorado. And we do that by engaging kids when they are young and they're thinking about how they could be a citizen and what they could do. Our goal is to get them to become a really active and engaged citizen throughout their lives. The second reason we do it is it builds social cohesion in your communities. When these kids go out and they're working with communities, talking to stakeholders, whether it's the floodplain manager or the local fire district or whatever it might be, they're really building social cohesion. They're bringing people together. And then the last thing is that these kids are supporting local mitigation efforts. So in Estes Park, the city had been working for a number of years on how to help community members better improve their fire preparedness. The young people were able to engage in a way that moved. Sorry, my cat is making me crazy here for a second. But the young people were able to engage with community members in a way that got them to understand the individual fire risks that they had and to take action to do that, to decrease that risk. So as I said, this is an innovative partnership that we've been doing with FEMA for the last 4 years. We have a lot of other partners like the ASFPM Foundation and others who help us work with kids, but it's something that I think is really exciting and a new way to engage our communities and get our people thinking about how to be prepared for the natural disasters that Colorado faces. And I think that after mine, it's open for questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Vince, and your cat making an appearance there, guest appearance, no worries. Now we are going to take some questions. Please use the question and answer button there. And if you do have a question, please type the question and submit it. And if we are not able to get to your question, because we are coming at the end of the hour, please put your contact information and we will be able to get back to you with an answer. Also, we have an email that is available to you with FEMA that you can email your question and we will have that with our resources. First thing, it looks like Roger asked a really poignant question about mitigation measures. This was in the chat and Roger asked, where can property owners find a reputable vendor to help with landscape mitigation, such as dead and or live tree removal? And I know, looks like Jean and Eric took a first stab at answering Roger's question, but didn't know if Jean or Eric, if you guys wanted to come off mute and share the answer with the rest of the group.
This is Eric. I don't really know the full answer, but I know at our Larimer County resources page for fire survivors, there is a list of resources on land restoration, as well as a list of forestry contractors associated with the Colorado State Forest Service. So it's basically Larimer extension dot, well, it's hard to, if you look in the chat, you can go to that that URL and look up the list of contractors and look up some other resources on restoring the land after a fire.
Yeah, and this is Gene. I think Eric's answer really goes a little deeper into what the potential answer could be. I was just thinking that the Colorado State Forest Service, since they're in a lot of the communities anyway, they would be able to provide that information. and he's just providing the link to it. So thanks.
Thanks, guys. And I did repost those links in the chat. So I'm going to move to the question and answer box, it looks like. Denise. Whoop. Oh, all right. So looks like we have Denise that asked a question about the Blue Mountain neighborhood on the Little Thompson River. There's only one evacuation route via a bridge on Stagecoach Trail. After the 2013 flood, residents asked Larimer County and FEMA officials to work on a second evacuation route to the north, which requires crossing a private land. Did anything come of that? And it looks like Eric took a first stab at answering that question, saying, I don't know, but we can look into it and find out where it went, and provided his contact information, which will be part of this presentation in a slide later. I don't know if any of our other panelists have a specific knowledge of that evacuation route in Larimer County. No worries. Denise, we will make sure to follow up with you on your inquiry. And Terry, yes, we did put the resource links in the chat, but then also at the end of this presentation, one of the slides has some great resources we're going to share. Let's see, we've got time for one more question. It comes from Stephanie. She asks, can you describe what happens on the surface of a burn scar during rainfall and how that leads to flood/slide risk? This was briefly touched on, but would love to know more. I don't know if Doug or someone wants to talk about the burn scar, but also Stephanie, we will be having another rendition of our flood after fire presentation that we did on Monday. We will also have it next week on the 20th in the evening, and I can make sure that you get the information to sign up for that. The flood after fire, it's going to go into more detail on this, but didn't know real quickly if one of our panelists wants to talk about burn scars real quick.
Hi, this is Doug again. Stephanie, thank you for your question. What I'll do is I'll read directly off of a website. So in severe wildfires, the combustion of vegetative materials creates a gas that penetrates the soil profile. As the soil cools, this gas condenses and forms a waxy coating. This causes the soil to repel water. This hydrophobic condition increases the rate of water runoff. Percolation of water into the soil profile is reduced, making it difficult for seeds to germinate and for the roots of surviving plants to obtain moisture. So in a nutshell, this waxy coating that is caused by the wildfire increases the water on the surface during a rainfall because the water cannot absorb into the soil and water flows downhill. This water moves downhill towards watersheds and thereby increasing the risk and severity of flooding. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks so much, Doug. And Doug will be going into more detail on that flood after fire presentation next week. That is all the time we have for questions. So thanks so much for those questions. And I'm going to hand it over to Joan to review these resources real quick.
Thank you, Sam. We have a list of contacts and resources. There were some questions, the question about the evacuation route, probably follow up with your local emergency management office to see if what the determination was from that 2013 flood. There's also a lot more resources other than this, and we'll be sending those out as well as a link to the recorded videos. They'll be posted on a state website, and that'll come from this mitigation email address, the FEMA-R8 hmhelp@fema.dhs.gov. Or if you have additional questions, you may also send an email to that email address. And I want to say a big thank you to the panelists and presenters today. I felt like it was really informative and interesting, and I think I learned some stuff today, which was really great. And again, we have 2 more webinars next week. The Flood After Fire will be on April 20, 5:30 to 6:30. And then this same webinar will be on the 21st from 5:30 to 6:30. Thank you for participating.
Yes, and I will echo Joan in saying thank you so much to all of the folks participating on this webinar. And we hope you learned something new. We hope you learned something valuable, and we hope you learned something that you can share. Also, a big thank you to all of our panelists and experts, not only for their sharing their knowledge, but then also answering questions live. So, well, that is the end of our webinar. We hope you learned something new, and we hope that you will join us if you'd like to next week for either this webinar or the Flood After Fire. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and we hope everyone is staying safe.